Hey, you probably know Georgia has that hands-free law when it comes to using the cell phone in your car, but some new data is raising a question over whether smartphone distraction is still driving crashes, especially among youth. Joining us now for an important conversation this morning is Maurice Raines, Deputy Director of the Governor's Office of Highway Safety, to talk about what the numbers show and what needs to change. Mr. Raines, good morning, sir. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on today.
Well, you're welcome. We know this law, this hands-free law, went into effect in Georgia about 8 years ago, 2018. From your perspective, is it making a difference when it comes to reducing crashes and fatalities?
It is making a difference, but we do have an issue in our state. Not only our state, we're grateful to have a hands-free law from House Bill 673 that was enacted July 1 of 2018. However, once the law was in effect, we did see a 5% decrease right out the chute. Here lately, though, the numbers are not going in the direction we wanted them to go in. We have a group of young drivers. That's where the highest is per 100,000 licensed drivers. That it is an issue, but all of us have to admit at some point while driving, we are distracted.
How do you get through to those young drivers? Sadly, Mr. Raines, I don't think they're watching 11 Alive Plus at 10:15 on this Thursday morning. How do you find them, and what's your message to them?
We have to go where they are with the message. We have to go to events that they attend and have messaging out there with information of how serious this situation is across our state, not only across the state, our nation, and educate them. And unfortunately, if education does not work, the only other component we have is enforcement. And we're doing our best to do that. We do have a new strategy in the governor's office of highway safety coming out on April 1. Won't talk about what that is, but I think it's going to be great to work in that capacity to help us with these distracted drivers.
How do you enforce this? Is it one of the things where a trooper's driving down the road and they look over and see somebody on their phone, or is it more methodical than that?
It is. It's one of those moments. It's unfortunate, even though an officer makes a traffic stop for being distracted, somebody else drive by distracted. So we definitely have to get the educational piece in place, and we're doing that, and we're gonna see that intensify come April 1. Getting the message out, and we do know, and I will say this: we can't do this alone. The motoring public has to help us with this issue. And once we do the educational piece, we'll have to do less enforcement. But if the educational piece doesn't work, then we have no choice but to go to enforcement.
You know, when we talk about education, this number really stood out to me. Only about 5% of young drivers in fatal Georgia crashes had been drinking, and yet we know if you want to get a driver's license here in Georgia, you got to go through this alcohol education class, or at least learn about it. Do you think it's time to mandate distracted driving education as well before you get a license?
Well, anytime you can mandate something before you get started, and I will say this, and I want to defend young people right out the chute. Young people have watched their parents speed. They've watched their parents talk on the cell phone. They watched their parents not be buckled. And I pray to God none. There's been a few that have seen their parents impaired while driving. So the issue that we have is changing the behavior that they learn before they even begin to drive. And we're working in that capacity. And to be honest with you, we're actually getting ready to educate at the fourth and fifth grade. Because the middle school kids are already kind of developed habits based on what they've seen their parents do. But I want you to think about this component for just a moment. As soon as a 15-year-old gets a learner's permit and they get behind the wheel with their parent, the first thing the parent says to them: don't you speed, put on your seatbelt, and don't you dare pick up that phone. And they watch their parents do it for years. So the culture is in place. So what I'm getting at, the most important thing we can do now is try to drive home the educational piece by going where these kids are. We've got to go to the schools. We've got to go to these sporting events. We've got to have events that they will be, whether even if it's an expo or a fair or whatever. We're going to all of those components to try to educate, because education is key. If we can educate, then we don't have to enforce.
Speaking of getting through to the youth and culture perhaps being a problem, I want to ask you about some breaking news we got about an hour ago. Two UGA football players were arrested overnight for reckless driving. We have talked about this before in the program. I'm not asking you to speak about this case specifically, but just broadly speaking, how do you buck that trend? Because we have seen this happen time and time again when it comes to young athletes inside that one program.
It's immaturity for one. It's an immaturity piece, whether it be I'm just going to see what I can do. I'm going to see what I can get away with. So it's immaturity is part of the equation. But a lot of people young feel that there's no consequences for their action until they're caught, and most of the time they get caught. And so I think again it goes back to I'm certain that when we single out sporting events because they are high profile and they're seen all the time. The question is, we do know that these coaches and these athletes are given guidance as to what to do and not to do. It's just about taking a chance. It's just like beginning to speed. When you look at the speedometer, it says 55 and you see it go to 60, you're speeding.
Hmm.
So the component at that point is just getting caught. So I think what has to happen in that capacity is we've got to drive home education. That's the only way we're going to change the trend. And again, it goes back to what I said earlier. We cannot do this alone. We have to have the public's help.
If Coach Kirby Smart asked you to come speak to his program, what would your message be to college age students? You talked about trying to find fourth graders and fifth graders at a young age and get to them early. But what about when you're 20 years old and you've already started to develop these habits? What do you preach to a college student?
First of all, the consequences for bad behavior. Everyone has to understand that there is consequences when you do conduct bad behavior. And in conducting bad behavior, when you conducting bad behavior, you're going to have to deal with it. And so when you don't have that mindset that you could get caught or there are consequences on the end, you take chances.
Maurice Raines, Deputy Director of Georgia's Office of Highway Safety. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate what you do in protecting our youth out there and protecting all drivers on Georgia roadways. Is there anything else you want to say today?
Yes, thank you for having us on. We're driving home the educational piece in the Governor's Office of Highway Safety. We thank all law enforcement for their part on the enforcement initiative that they put on every single day, 365 days a year. We thank them for their efforts and what they do trying to make the motoring public safe. And the last component would be we cannot do this by ourselves. We need the motoring public to help us with this situation. And I believe we're going to make the turns that we need to make because we're going to do our part to educate, and law enforcement is going to do its part to do the enforcement side.
Very good. Maurice Raines, we'll leave it there. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.